Christmas is supposed to be safe, predictable, wrapped in lights, routines, and the quiet promise that, at least for one night, nothing truly bad will happen. And that belief is exactly why Christmas is so terrifying when it goes wrong. Because when horror strikes on Christmas, it doesn't just take lives, it shatters a shared illusion. The contrast is so violent that the stories linger for decades, sometimes centuries, etched into collective memory like a stain that never quite fades. Tonight, we're not talking about fictional nightmares or exaggerated urban legends. These are real deaths, real people, real Christmases that ended in ways so disturbing, so unexpected, that investigators, historians, and families are still haunted by them today. And some of these cases hide details most people never hear about, details that completely change how you see what happened. But we're starting with a case almost everyone thinks they understand, and then we're going to pull the floor out from under it. The Christmas that froze a town in silence. On December 25, 1929, in Germantown, North Carolina, neighbors woke up expecting a normal Christmas morning. By lunchtime, nearly an entire family was dead. The Lawson family murders are often summarized quickly, almost too quickly. A father killed his wife and children, then himself. Tragic, disturbing. End of story. Except it isn't. Charlie Lawson was described by neighbors as quiet, hard-working, and devoted to his family. Just days before Christmas, he took them into town to buy new clothes and had a professional family photograph taken, something they'd never done before. The image shows smiling children, neatly dressed, standing close together. No one knew it would become a death portrait. On Christmas morning, Charlie systematically killed his wife and 6 of his 7 children before taking his own life. The youngest child survived only because he had been sent on an errand. For decades, the motive was assumed: madness, poverty, stress. But later analysis suggested something more unsettling. Charlie may have been suffering from an untreated brain injury after a head trauma months earlier. Modern neurologists reviewing the case believe damage to the frontal lobe, responsible for impulse control and judgment, could explain the sudden, catastrophic break from reality. That possibility doesn't comfort anyone, because it means this Christmas horror may not have been hatred, but a mind quietly collapsing while no one noticed. And that raises a disturbing question we'll come back to later. How many unexplainable Christmas tragedies weren't random at all? The case that turned Christmas into a crime scene forever. If Christmas has a single unsolved death that refuses to fade, it's this one. December 26, 1996, Boulder, Colorado. JonBenét Ramsey. Most people remember the headlines: Child Beauty Queen, Ransom Note, Family Under Suspicion, Media Frenzy. What's less remembered is how profoundly the timing changed everything. Christmas night had just ended. Gifts still sat open. Decorations were still lit. The house smelled like pine and wrapping paper. And somewhere inside that home, a 6-year-old girl was dead. The ransom note, written inside the house, remains one of the most bizarre pieces of evidence in American criminal history. It was long, rambling, personal. It demanded an oddly specific amount of money, the exact sum of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus. That detail alone shattered the illusion of an outside intruder for many investigators. But here's the part that still unsettles professionals. Statistically, crimes committed on major holidays are less likely to be random. Studies from the FBI and Bureau of Justice Statistics show that violent crimes on holidays are disproportionately committed by someone the victim knows. The stress, alcohol, emotional pressure, and forced togetherness create volatile conditions. Christmas doesn't reduce violence, it concentrates it. And in the Ramsey case, Christmas amplified everything: the suspicion, the chaos, the mistakes. Evidence was compromised by well-meaning friends. The scene wasn't secured. Investigators disagreed from the start. More than 25 years later, no one has been charged. And every December, the case resurfaces, not because of new evidence, but because Christmas itself keeps reopening the wound. But not all Christmas deaths happen quietly behind closed doors. Some arrive in fire. The man who turned Christmas Eve into a war zone. December 24th, 2008, Covina, California. Bruce Pardo arrived at a Christmas Eve party dressed as Santa Claus. He carried wrapped gifts. He smiled. He rang the doorbell. And then he opened fire. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was engineered for maximum devastation. Pardo wore a homemade flamethrower and carried multiple firearms. He had modified his Santa suit to conceal ammunition. By the time the attack ended, 9 people were dead. The house was engulfed in flames. Bodies were so badly burned that identification took weeks. Pardo had planned it around Christmas for a reason. Investigators later confirmed he chose the date because he knew the entire family would be together. Holidays create predictability, and predictability creates opportunity. Here's the chilling insight. Criminologists note that mass casualty attackers often select symbolic dates to maximize psychological impact. Christmas isn't just a gathering, it's a cultural nerve. Pardo died by suicide later that night. And every year since, Covina treats Christmas Eve differently. Quiet, controlled, vigilant. Because once you've seen Christmas weaponized, you never fully trust it again. But sometimes, the horror doesn't come from a person at all. Sometimes, it comes from the house itself. The Christmas fire that no one could explain. Christmas Eve, 1945, Fayetteville, West Virginia. The Sodder family went to sleep expecting a normal morning. They never saw 5 of their children again. A fire broke out shortly after midnight, consuming the family home. George and Jenny Sodder escaped with 4 of their children. 5 others, aged 5 to 14, were presumed dead. But there was a problem. No remains were found. Not bones, not teeth, nothing. Fire investigators claimed the blaze was hot enough to completely cremate the bodies, but modern forensic experts dispute that claim. Even intense house fires typically leave fragments behind. The Sodders noticed something else. The ladder they always kept against the house was missing. The phone line had been cut. Witnesses reported seeing strange lights near the home that night. Over the years, the family received alleged sightings of their children, older, alive, seen in other states. A photograph mailed anonymously decades later appeared to show one of the missing boys as an adult. The case was never solved, and it raises a horrifying possibility. What if Christmas Eve wasn't the night the Sodder children died, but the night they disappeared forever? The Sodders spent the rest of their lives searching. Their Christmas decorations stayed up year-round, a silent accusation. When Christmas traditions become deadly. Not every horrific Christmas death comes from crime. Some come from tradition. On December 24, 1953, in Tangiwai, New Zealand, a passenger train plunged into a river after a volcanic lahar destroyed the bridge beneath it. 151 people died. Families were traveling home for Christmas. Children were asleep in their seats. Gifts were packed under benches. The disaster remains New Zealand's deadliest rail accident. Here's what makes it especially haunting. Warning signs were visible hours earlier. Water levels rose. Infrastructure weakened. But Christmas schedules pushed everything forward. Delays were unthinkable. Psychologists call this calendar pressure, the tendency to override caution because the date feels too important to change plans. Christmas kills not because it's cursed, but because people ignore risk in its name, which leads to the darkest realization of all. The final truth we avoid every year. Every December, we repeat the same rituals: lights, music, movies, familiar narratives. And buried beneath all of it is a quiet agreement: nothing bad happens at Christmas. But history doesn't support that belief. Christmas doesn't protect us. It exposes us. It reveals fractures in families. It amplifies loneliness. It creates moments where one decision, one overlooked warning, can change everything. That's why these stories stay with us, not because they ruin Christmas, but because they remind us that the darkness doesn't take holidays off. And the scariest part, the most horrific Christmas death, is always the next one we assume could never happen. So next time you hear "Silent Night," remember this: silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's just the moment before everything breaks. And in our next video, we'll explore the psychology of why humans are drawn to dark stories during the holidays, because that question has an answer far more unsettling than you'd expect.